It's a pleasure to be here. In some ways, I'd rather be in some of those places you mentioned earlier, like Barbados, Antigua, but alas. Um, I'm excited to talk about this topic of oral language and critical thinking because there's a lot of overlap in certain activities. I'm going to move on to the first, let's see. So first of all, what I spend a lot of time differentiating between oral output and interaction. Some people think they're the same, but and we'll talk a lot about we'll talk about both today. But oral output tends to be a one-way, one-time communication of ideas, and I think of it as more than one word, more than one sentence. That's what we're shooting for. There's been a lot of focus, particularly in the U.S., but in other countries as well, on short one-word answers. And that answer-focused mentality doesn't help some of the kids that we're most concerned about, doesn't help them practice explaining and articulating longer answers and more complex ideas. Often they're just looking for as many little short answers as possible to get their points on a test, and if they get their 80, 70, 90 points, that means they've learned. And so what there needs to be is somewhat of a shift to helping kids scaffolding their oral language abilities, particularly longer paragraph-like responses. Now, some activities that you're probably familiar with that have a lot of oral output are think, pair, shares, answering teacher questions, jigsaws, gallery walks, oral presentations. And these are all fine as long as you know you're working on oral output. For example, think, pair, share, some of them do turn into conversations and interactions, but a lot of think, pair, shares or turn and talks. Basically, you pose a question, you say, okay, turn and tell the answer to your partner. And often the more verbal kid will say the answer and the other kid will nod his head or say, oh, I agree, or that was my idea. And so they don't really turn into conversations as much. And yet it's still a great opportunity for kids to practice their oral output if we work on it with them. Now, conversations are more back and forth, where participants build on one another's ideas to build up ideas that weren't in their minds before talking. So it's not just one person teaching someone else something. It's not just one person talking, and it's not just saying answers. It's actually building something that wasn't there before by conversing about it and by using some of the skills I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. So one of the activities that I want to emphasize, I actually was teaching this activity yesterday in a couple different classrooms, the 3rd and 4th grade classrooms. And it didn't go perfectly, but there was a lot of progress made, and the students were very engaged. So what I call these is stronger and clearer each turn activities, and you can probably guess what that means. Essentially, you prompt students for some original response, and I could prompt you right now, for example, what is the advantage of building oral language in the classroom? This wouldn't be a elementary level or school level, but this would be like a teacher-like prompt that I would give in a workshop, and you would think of your answer, and then you would say your idea to the first partner, and then to other partners, and as you said it to other partners, you'd borrow and use the language, ideas, and evidence of previous partners each time that you talk. Now, some activities like called give one, get one, or some of these activities where kids go around and tell answers to one another, those are popular activities. This is a major tweak, a major change, adaptation, because now you're saying to kids, no, you can't just say the same answer 3 times and basically check that off your list and say, I'm done. What we're doing is really trying to push students to improve both the strength of their answers, and the strength meaning stronger, more accurate evidence. This would be the kind of the content side of things, And then the clarity. So their responses ideally become clearer with more precise terms. They might borrow vocabulary, and especially they would link sentences together and organize them to make a clear message, more so than what you often hear from kids, particularly kids who struggle with language. And finally, the nice thing about this activity is that scaffolds, like maybe a poster on the wall that kids use, you could actually put something up on the board or a poster to use the first 1 or 2 turns, and then you take it down for the 3rd turn. So you're actually building that independence. You're removing the scaffolding during the activity. And so in the last turn, you say, okay, everyone, close your notes. No poster. I'm going to cover up the poster. Now let's see what you got in your brain from actual, having practice already 2 or 3 times and having heard ideas from others. So here's an example. We're going to focus on Sarah. She's in the middle. And this idea is actually called an opinion continuum. It's still a stronger and clearer each time activity because Sarah's going to talk to 3 different partners. And the interesting twist of this is that it is, an opinion. Actually, this ban over here should be not ban instead of ban. So this side is ban on the left side, and the right side is not ban. And Sarah puts her name, or me, on a Post-it. It could be, it's just something in pencil as well that she can erase and move. It makes it movable, so in case she changes her position on the continuum somewhere, based on her conversation, she can move it. So she answers the prompt, and so this is her first answer, and she says, video games are bad because they show violence. I am way over here. So now, if in a normal activity this were just a give one, get one, she would probably say the same thing every time and not improve her language or her content. So now the first partner responds, I'm on the not banned side. I think video games are kind of good. I know some games you shoot people, but some teach you. So then the teacher says, take a one or 2 word notes and then switch. And if you notice, these I'd say these clouds become somewhat in her brain, in Sarah's brain, not memorized, but they're resources that her brain might use for her next turn, and we want her to try to consciously use some, and her brain might subconsciously use others. So we'll see what happens with her second partner. So our second partner comes up. Look, notice that she's moved a little bit over to the right, basically based on her first conversation. And then she says, I'm on the banned side, but not way over. I think games should be banned because war video games, you shoot others, but some are good, so that's why I changed my spot. Did you notice she used some ideas and even some vocabulary from her first partner to say her idea? Then her second partner says, I'm on the far right. Even though some video games are violent, a lot teach you. We have a right to choose our games too. So she actually introduces a new idea to the mix. She puts her name over here on the right. And then, take notes and switch. Now, Sarah has she's practiced some language, getting a little bit better on the left side, and she's got these resources that she might remember or hopefully remembers or maybe took notes on from the right side. And her third partner comes up. Look, notice she's moved over quite a bit, almost near the middle. And she says, I'm a little left of middle. Even though some video games are good, we need to ban violent. Some games teach you, so they are good, but kids' minds get violent when they shoot others. And we have rights to choose our games. This made me move over. Now, notice, again, that it's not perfect grammar, but notice how much stronger and clearer her message got just from this activity, just from working. There's 2 advantages to this. One is that she hears face-to-face, eye-to-eye, she hears ideas from other students, and also she gets to practice a couple times her oral response. Now this is kind of rare. A lot of kids do not get time. For example, in a kind of common traditional lecture style classroom, the teacher calls on, says a question, maybe 5 or 6 hands raise, and you call on 1 or 2. So only 2 out of 30 to 35 kids, in some cases 40 to 45, get to talk, and they talk once. Whereas in this case, even though it's a little bit of mayhem, having kids mix with one another and go around the classroom, it can allow the practice that kids need and the hearing of language, the input, if you want, the comprehensible input from other students, just from kind of a simple, this is a basic activity and can be used in any classroom. And so what I would do if I were with you guys in a group is I would have you, for example, do this activity. And some of you might be lead teachers, or you can bring these ideas back to your classrooms and your schools. You might use this as an idea to show others, this type of activity. And what I have some sentence frames down here. But what I would do is I would say, okay, now social media, is it more positive or more negative? And I would have you choose where you would go on the continuum. And then I would have you talk to a first partner and describe where you are and why. I would also model this. First of all, I would model a non-model. Like I said before, I would maybe take this and I would go to one person and say my basic answer, and I go to the next person and say the same answer, and go to the next person and say the same answer. And that would show a non-model. And then I would actually show a good model. I would start with my first partner, and then I would build up and make my answer stronger and clearer for my second partner to model what needs to happen in the activity. And so I'm not going to tell you right now my position on social media, but it usually draws quite a bit of conversation, both from teachers and students. If you notice the sentence frames, I'm kind of wary of sentence frames in that sometimes they're overdone. I've seen a lot of teachers and classrooms where the whole class and lesson is sentence frame-ified and has sentence frames for everything, and and it's not authentic. And so what I do is I provide sentence frames and I say they're optional. Try to challenge yourself at times to use 1 or 2, but I don't stress kids out and say, okay, I'm going to give you a point for every sentence frame that you use. And I make sure that they understand the language of the sentence frame too. It's often easy just to slap them up on the wall and say, okay, these are your sentence frames, go for it. And there's quite a bit of academic language that needs to be kind of modeled and taught in a lot of sentence frames. Now that being said, the nice thing about sentence frames is it does up the it ups the academic language level of their responses, and in many cases it can become fluent and automatic because they, for example, in this activity with social media, positive and negative, they really are invested in describing their meaning, what they mean. And there's a lot of, that's one of the goals of education, is to make it engaging and meaningful. And so even though you can't have every activity be on social media or school lockers or school uniforms, that kind of thing, these are common topics around here. The more we can get kids to interact and try to articulate their thoughts to others in an authentic way and not just for points, the better off kids are going to be in terms of their critical thinking and their language. Everyone okay so far? Okay. It's tough to glance at all these comments. Okay. Great. All right, I'll keep going. And again, you feel free. It looks like there aren't a whole lot of people, and so feel free to email me. I think I have my contact information will be at the end. And if you want further explanations on certain things or further resources, I also have a website that has a lot of downloadable tools and explanations for this. There are also some MOOCs, which stands for Massive Open Online Course, that are free, and we have a lot of international folks join up, and I'll give that information too, I think, at the end. What's nice about these MOOCs is that it actually, on a monthly or kind of bi-weekly basis, you get ideas, materials, but you also have to turn in an assignment and go out and actually gather language and evidence of critical thinking and language, and then reflect on it. So that's kind of a form of professional development that we offer. All right, moving on. So here are some other ideas for you, not just social media, but character motivation on in a story. Let's say, is it greed or love? You could actually decide how far down the continuum you are of these choices. You could also ask, was World War I justified? Yes, no. There's a lot of questions that have kind of these two sides to them that you can adapt this particular activity. Okay. All right. Now we're moving to conversations or interactions. So we did a lot of that last activity. Even though you can get into conversations, particularly about social media, after you say your idea and there's enough time, and that's okay. Now we're moving into actually building conversation skills. So this first type, I've kind of come up with these two types of conversations that happen in schools. The first type is where you build, or kids build, one idea. They're in agreement. There aren't two or three or more ideas on the table, and what they do is they build up an idea, and this idea could be a claim. Could be for example, if they look at some evidence from a science lab that they did and they're in agreement, they might build up that answer, a solution to a problem, some interpretation, like we just saw, like the theme in a novel, the main theme in a novel. They might be in agreement, and so they use these skills to build up that idea. So the first one, of course, is just creating the idea in the first place. And that's something we need to model for students, because particularly in younger grades, kids will come up with some crazy, non-relevant ideas. And then after the idea is on the table, then they clarify it. Now, clarifying, if you're taking notes here, clarifying involves paraphrasing. You might hear, a lot of people teaching paraphrasing. You want to make sure the paraphrase is generally shorter than the original comment. And then also defining, what do you mean by courage? What do you mean by greed? Defining terms, paraphrase, and then also elaborating, just meaning more explanation, explaining more about what you're talking about. And that's clarifying. And then you've also got supporting ideas, and this is really big these days, particularly with the advent of the Common Core standards and a lot of state standards, and even English language development standards focus a lot on supporting ideas with evidence. And if you notice down here, I don't know if you can see my arrow, but under the first X is a book, and that's, for example, giving evidence from the text. And this is the text that you're working on, currently. And then looking at other texts that we might have already read, or something you've read on the side. It could be even a film or movie. And then over here is the world. So text from the world or your community, and anything from outside of the text. And then finally, your own life. Can you give an example to support it from your own life? Now, one of the things that I try to tend to lean toward this order of text, other text, world, and you, because some students, a lot of students, if you start with give an example from your life, then they end up talking about their life the whole time and sometimes forget about the text. So in this order tends to work better. Now some teachers might want to start with your life, give an example. That's fine. But in general, I'd like to build the habit of kids going to the text first, because that's what we're talking about, and that's the focus of the lesson usually, and then moving out to other texts, which we've also covered in school, and then moving out to these other things. So it doesn't have to be, but that's the habit that I try to build. Now, if you notice, these things, especially these two skills, can do a lot for building up one idea. Now, this second type, I call it a BC, just for build and choose the best. If you notice, there are two or more ideas. I just put two in this graphic. But what they do is that students collaboratively build claims and ideas and then choose from them using the following skills. I didn't go over this before, but without the teacher. So one of the goals that we're trying to get into students is that their skills for having their own conversations. What they tend to do is they have become addicted and reliant on teachers for anything to do with a somewhat academic conversation. And so what we're trying to do is build these skills for them to do things that teachers often do. And that is like the skills that I already mentioned. I mean, one is not to create ideas necessarily, but clarifying ideas. Often teachers ask, "Can you elaborate? Can you give an example of that? Right? Can you define what you mean by? What do you mean by that? Can you tell me more about?" Now, so often, what students and adults do is we say the minimum and then we wait for someone to pressure us for more. Whereas what we're really trying to do now is kind of break that habit in kids and get them to actually come up with the full, clear, strong idea at first, in their first shot, and not wait for someone else or wait for the teacher, for example, to just draw it out of them and hopefully pass them by. So what we're trying to do is, and this is in a paired setting. So we're really trying to build those habits in pairs, because kids and adults spend a lot of time in life talking with one other person, and so that's just a skill that can really benefit them. Plus, it can give them a lot more practice in talking and listening. Now, so this BC conversation, this last skill on the left that you think is missing, is evaluating and comparing. So once we've built up both ideas, so let's say we go, the first idea, right? Someone poses an idea. Well, I'm going to want to make sure that we explore that and build that up as much as possible first. I might disagree with you and have a different idea, but if I immediately shut you down, if I immediately say, "Oh, I disagree," when you have posed an idea, then we don't actually build up your idea first. So if I wait and we build it up together, and I pose questions, I might even help you with some evidence that I thought of. So it's collaborative, right? It's not a competition here. Then, after we build up both ideas, yours and let's say mine, and there might even be someone else's, then we have to compare them and choose. And this is what we do when we make choices in life. In fact, you might be going out there and deciding between two products that you want to buy and two brands, and you might do the same thing, right? You might build up both sides of the positive, the pros and cons of each side, and then decide, well, this side weighs more, has more positives than this side. And so that's what we do. And what I'm trying to do is help teachers to start early on and build kids' abilities to make these, this is critical thinking as well. This isn't just, oh, I think it should be this because I really like that and it tastes good. This is critical thinking. And so what it is, it's critical thinking through conversation. And here's I'll come up with a graphic that'll come back to that in a minute that'll be more explicit. But first of all, I want to give you a little test. So I want to know what type of conversation this is, and you feel free to type in the little box, and I'll take a look. I can only see a few of them, but at any time. But these are quick little snippets of conversation, but I want to hear what you think about them. So here's the first one. I don't think air has weight. This is science. I disagree because I think it does. Remember the balloon. I respectfully disagree with you. Then we just agree to disagree, right? So what type of conversation is it? Type B, which is just building one idea, or type BC, where you're building and then choosing, or building two ideas or more and then choosing? It has potential more to be a BC because I don't think air has weight and I think it does. So there's two ideas going on here, right? Now, what I'm more concerned about is the feedback. What feedback would you give? Let's say feedback to Eli. Thank you for those who are doing the typing and participating. Any other feedback? I see multiple attendees are typing. So I'm not going to wait too long, but you can type in Spanish. That's fine with me. Yeah, so Sonia said, ask for examples or ask for, build up this first idea. Even though her first idea is wrong, and I don't want to say build it up because it is wrong, but explore it and ask for examples. Ask for why does, Eli could ask, he just disagrees right away. And so he could ask, well, why do you think that? And she might just think, well, I hold my hands out, and so I don't feel the air weighing on my hands. It's not heavy at all, right? And so that might be an example that she gives, which is fine. Then Eli says, well, I disagree because I think it does. Remember the balloon. What could Laura say now? And Laura, let's say it does get to this point. Laura could say two things. Laura could say, hey, let's get back to my idea. That would be a little more of a meta conversation level, a lot more mature, because she might know that, hey, we need to do both ideas here, Eli. We need to start with mine, whether it's right or wrong. But Laura could also, let's say it does get to this, remember the balloon. That's not very clear. It actually is a solid example because they weighed a balloon with air and weighed a balloon without air, and there was a difference. So it is a great example, but he's not very clear here. So Laura could say, well, what about the balloon? How does the balloon and that lab that we did with the balloon support your idea? All right, so that would be an explanation. Okay. Now, also, I want to point out this. They use some pretty good academic language. These are sentence frames. I disagree because I think it does. I respectfully disagree with you. Notice that sentence frames, you can use sentence frames and still not have a very good conversation. Remember that. Just because you use sentence frames doesn't mean it's a good conversation because they did not use good conversation skills to build up both ideas and then compare them, right? By the way, I'm going to give this in Spanish at some point, I think. So just so you know, I have a little bit of an accent, but I enjoy speaking in Spanish. So moving on, next conversation. Let's see, where is it? This is language arts or English. I think the dog was his best friend in this story. That's a pretty strong first idea, right? I would like to add to your idea. Now that's a nice, right? That's a sentence frame. My dog ran away last year and we found him in the park. Which park? The one by the train station. I took a train to San Jose last week. So I think some of you are probably laughing a little bit. Why? What's wrong with this conversation? Well, first of all, what type of conversation is it? Is it just a one idea conversation or a two idea and choose conversation? Yeah, it's a one idea conversation. What's wrong with that? What feedback would you give? Let's say particularly to Edgar, what feedback would you give? Yeah, I see there's no follow-up. There's lots of language, right? But it's going way off the mark. It's not focused. Remember that diagram with the 4 skills on it and the thing in the center, building up one idea, let's say, and this is a one idea. They're not building up one idea. They're going off on, they're now in San Jose on the train. And they could keep on talking like this, and that's how kids do talk, right? They'll make connection, but they're not focused on this idea of the dog was his best friend in the story. Edgar should have said what? Should have said, well, what's your example? Or what's an example of that? Or what's your evidence of that? Why do you think that? Right? And he might have built on off of that, but notice how one little move, like my dog ran away last year, we found him in the park, can take the conversation to places we don't want it to go. Even though in the back of the classroom, I might be observing, I might be a school director or a principal and say, oh, there's lots of language happening here. If you don't listen closely to the conversation and really dig into where it's going and its purpose, you can miss it. All right, so here's what I like to use as a scaffold for these, basically the BC or the two idea or the argument conversations. And what we have here is it's essentially like a balance scale, if you look at it. And you've got a claim or an idea on one side, and then you have an opposite or different claim on the other. And I have some examples here of what you could put in the middle. So magnets attract all metals. We know that's wrong, right? But what we'd like kids to do is, start off with this idea and then support either way. And they might have to do a lab to do that. Actually, I was in a classroom yesterday where they had different types of metal. They had an aluminum nail and a steel washer, and they were deciding, which. First of all, they knew that this is a no, right? Magnets don't attract all metals, but then they were deciding, well, which ones and why. They were exploring that. Another would be all petroleum is biogenic, meaning comes from dead things. There might be some article that says, there are some natural geological processes that produce petroleum. Video games banned or not, we already saw that. Should the U.S. have entered the war, whatever war they were talking about? Yes or no? What's the main theme of the story? Is it courage or perseverance? Are humans good or evil? Right? There's lots of opinions on that, and they could go back and forth. Not necessarily a first or second grade example, but I think this came from middle school or high school. So now one example that came up in one classroom was kids read an article on pizza being given to students as a reward for reading. And so the students read the article, and then they had to decide. They actually used this balance scale. And what you do is first of all, you build up the reasons, evidence, and explanations. That's what the EXP stands for. So razones, evidencia, y explicaciones. And what they do is they're different size boxes. They're not the same size. Okay? And if you notice, what this forces kids to do is decide, well, what is the biggest reason or strongest evidence, heaviest evidence that will help my position? Now, I love it when kids talk about this, right? If they just come up with 3 boxes, that's what kids do. It's like, oh, that's 3 answers. The first 3 things that even pop into their mind or that pop off the page, they'll put in here. But if you force them to actually prioritize and compare the weights of the evidence, then you've got something. Then you've got some good discussion, okay? And so then you build up one side, remember? Have to build up one side. Then it's kind of leaning way over. You build up the other side, same thing, okay? Now you have both sides. Then you compare the evidence on both sides. Now, in some cases, in older students, you'll use some criteria for comparing these two, but in a lot of cases, it'll be this side versus this side, or the amount of money spent versus the amount of money spent on this side. You can actually do some comparison. In this case, the kids decided that, okay, well, yes, pizza could be used as a reward for reading, right? Now, if it had been ice cream, some of them might have said, well, I love ice cream, but it's not that healthy, so I don't know if that would have weighed them to the other side. There's also a three-dimensional version, and that's downloadable from the web page that I'll give you. If you notice, there's kind of this crossbar, and then they put these different colored cards in to, and this is an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. I think some of you probably use A4 size paper. And you can cut that out and then make a kind of a three-dimensional version that's a little more manipulative, sometimes a little more fun, but they're still dealing with abstract ideas and critical thinking. Now, what they do is, you can't see it very well, but the cards have different sizes, and that would be the different size that corresponds to like the heaviest reason. So the bigger the card, the heavier it is, the more it weighs it down. All right? And that's, I'm open for questions now. That's kind of what I have for those two types of activities. I'll put my contact information up, and then we'll look at a few questions, okay? I know that was kind of a quick run through, but I'm hoping that, you find those ideas useful and actually just explore them and adapt them to fit your needs. I know there's a lot of different needs out there, and there's a lot of different scaffolding that you have to do as a teacher to support those activities. I didn't tell you everything, and actually even yesterday, like I said, I was teaching an activity, and I would make changes for the next day, right? I've done this a lot, but still, every time I teach, I reflect on it and I think about what would help kids a little bit more to think more and to improve their language.